Oh, really?
championship. It was so nice.
Was it
I've
great?
skied up there. That's awesome.
Yeah, there's some really good cross-country terrain up there.
Is it at the facility that was developed by the
Yeah,
foundation there?
yeah, yeah.
Cool.
It's got a bike on, too. I don't think they do much with that anymore, but
Because they held like a World Cup biathlon there, right?
yeah.
10 years ago or something?
Yeah, I think it was done by the 10th Mountain Division.
We'll call to order the February 18 meeting of the Freeport Project Review Board. And Kyle, give us an update on what's happened since the last time we met.
Good. So yeah, just a quick info exchange. At our last planning board meeting, we looked at two items. One was a zoning text amendment. We had a public hearing for a paid parking prohibition in the VC1 and VC2, something that council had been doing some outreach on for a while and gave direction to the planning board to put a draft ordinance amendment together. So we did the public hearing for that. So that will be going back to council coming up in March and go through the adoption process. So that's basically, prohibiting any of the surface parking lots being used for like pay stations and those sorts of things. And then the other thing we looked at was a draft amendment, really coming out of the comprehensive plan update to upzone our commercial 1 and commercial 3 districts in the Route 1 South area from basically the Shaw's area all the way south to the town line. And this is primarily area zoned for commercial, and it allows residential uses currently, but the densities are so low that we never actually see any residential development happen in that corridor. We typically look at like 3 to 6 units an acre, which is, pretty low when it's in our growth area and it's supposed to be a mixed use corridor. So we're looking at fairly substantially increasing the density allowances there. This the PRB knows a lot of times when we have projects in that corridor, we look at those performance standards in section 527, which like when we looked at the Green Pest project recently, right? There's some building design standards and vehicle access, pedestrian access standards, especially for that corridor. So the planning board's looking at some improvements to that language as well. So at some point, we'll probably bring that to the PRB just for a second set of eyes. And, since this is the board that really uses those, to look at some of the suggestions that the planning board has for any feedback. So keep an eye out for that. That's it. No staff approval since our last meeting. So nothing there.
Thank you, Kyle. Has everyone had a chance to look at the proposed minutes for the January 21 meeting? Yep. Motion to accept them?
So moved?
Second? All in favor? Len?
Aye.
Unanimous. Thank you, Sharon. 2 items on the agenda tonight. The first is application of Bob Miles and Son at 0 US Route 1 for conceptual site plan review for a business building.
Yeah, it's just a quick overview. So this is for conceptual review. Pull up the application real quick. So we're on North Route 1 area for this project. Currently, the site is undeveloped. I mentioned in the staff report that a few years ago now, the board at the time had approved a project on this parcel that was never constructed for a similar use. So the applicant is proposing a concept for a 2-story building, roughly 7,200 square foot building footprint with a parking area to expand on their construction services business. That use is allowed. We're in the MDB district here. It's a 3-acre site. Little hard to see here, but basically you have some wetlands around the perimeter of the site, which is why the location of the building and parking area is down where it is. Just some high-level things to call out at this stage. Obviously, with the complete application, the applicant will have to come back with the usual, landscaping, lighting, stormwater utility plans, all of the engineering work. But specific to the MDB, there are some building design standards, kind of like the C1, C3 corridor, where it's not as strict as something like design review, but It's basically there to prevent, your long, monotonous, unfeatured spans of wall and things like that. There's some provisions for, the number of overhead doors that are generally allowed, visible from the right-of-way. So there's a few things to look at eventually with the building. I know the applicant provided an example concept of something they might be thinking about in the application. Let them expand more on that, though. Staff basically, we sent it out to codes, fire, police, public works. There were no real issues or concerns at this time, but we'll dive into it more once the full application comes in. But generally, setbacks, all of that looks fine at this stage. So I don't have anything more to add. So if someone wants to get up and just kind of give a brief overview and answer any questions the board has, that'd be great.
Sure. Hi,
You can go up to the podium, bud. Yeah. Either the podium or the table, either one's fine.
podium or stand. So I'm Robert Miles III, so I'm Bob Miles. I run the business now and own it with my father, and what we're looking at doing is just expanding our business. We're growing, of course, as far as our services that we provide, so we just need some more room, more space to provide more services is kind of what we're looking for.
Where's the site relative to, give us another landmark on that end of Route 1.
So further down Route 1 there is actually the on-ramp. So a little bit further down from this point right now, this is actually 2 lots down from our shop now. So it's right between us and then the on-ramp that goes into Brunswick.
Across from Zach Hub.
Yeah, right across. Yep.
And you folks will have a much more detailed plan when you come back in here?
Yes.
Okay. Any,
Question?
did members of the board have any questions?
I had a quick question.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Lynn.
Does that mean you'll be leaving your existing site and putting all the business in the new?
No, we will. No, our business will still operate out of the one we are now.
Thank you.
You'll operate out of two different addresses?
So our main operation for, all the influx of calls and all that kind of stuff will still operate out of the main 1162 Route 1. So our expansion is more so on our HVAC and our plumbing side. So pretty much more so for the crew to kind of have more space to operate.
Will the cars that people, your workers and your company cars, be located at one place or the other?
They're going to be spread between the two. Right now, we're noticing that our parking is definitely getting a little too tight. So we want to make it a lot easier and safer, especially with snow removal and plowing. So that both will have parking on both areas. Yeah.
When it comes back with the next round, is the building design going to be tailored to the site and your arrangement for the site? Meaning, will there be an elevation drawn for that compared to the image that we see in the current package, which is more generic, I would say, from a catalog maybe? Just to get it, so we can look at these things like Kyle mentioned with the door locations and sizes and buffering and that type
I guess I'm slightly understanding the question. As far as the visuals go, you're asking as far as like what it's going to look like from the street as a view, and then actually like a 3D image of what that will look like from that point of view?
I mean, yes, 3D is great, but obviously like a front and side elevations
Yep.
to help understand it completely in terms of what your actual intent is.
Yes, yeah. Well, the plan is to kind of from the entranceway. Our goal is to keep we have a neighbor that's in between us, so to keep the neighbor happy, he's very much asked for a good buffer. So what we'll have is a visual from when you drive up into it. So we're going to try to keep the buffer zone of the like tree coverage. So what we'll have is a visual from where you pull into of what you're going to see.
Okay. And there's a civil engineer developing the site plans?
We will have all that, yes.
Okay, great.
What's your thought in terms of when you'd come back with all the detail?
whenever, as soon as I can.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, we're excited about the expansion, so how soon you guys will take me, we'll have all of it.
Is the location, the new location currently wooded, or is it cleared?
It's wooded in a sense of around it, but the center of it's been cleared.
Because of the earlier application that never finished, I guess? Is that, I mean, why it was cleared?
I assume so. I'm not sure exactly when it was cleared, but that was my understanding, is that after that approval, it was cleared at some point, I guess, getting ready for that project, and then just wasn't constructed for whatever reason. Yeah.
Exactly.
But that was also before my time here, so someone might know more than I do.
Any other questions? Well, this is just concept review, and you want to make sure that we, react favorably to it, and we did.
Thank you.
You've got a lot of blanks to fill in, but.
Absolutely.
But we'll get you in and out of here. All set?
Cool.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone from the public have any comments about this before we go to the second item? Second agenda item is Beta Zeta Properties here for an extension of a approval which was given 2 years ago. Tom? Or Kyle, you want to talk?
I can just, real quick, like I said in the staff report, for these subdivision extension requests, we're not actually, it's not actually considered an amendment to a previous subdivision approval. So what we're looking at really is that the applicant comes in before the original approval lapsed. We're looking at if any ordinances that would have affected the project have changed. Let's say the density calculation in the district, was greatly, different than what it was then. And oftentimes the applicant will have, some sort of cause for, why the extension is necessary, which I'll let Tom go into. But from staff's point of view, there wasn't really any concern with the extension request. We have talked to the applicant on other things around if there are amendments proposed later down the line to things like phasing or anything else. That would then require an actual amendment. But seeing as the approval is about to lapse in about a month, we recommended that we kind of come in, just do the extension request and get that piece of it done in advance. So that's it for me. Turn it over to Tom, and happy to answer any questions later on.
Thanks, Kyle, and thanks for making some time for us tonight. It's pretty straightforward. Since our approval, there was actually a lot of interest in buying the project as a permitted project by other developers that these guys entertained. And as you can imagine, it's a very large transaction and takes several months to process. And a couple of those came and went without coming to fruition. Interest rates have come up and made financing projects like this, so that's factored in a little bit. And then, there's been some extenuating personal circumstances as well. But the good news is these guys are ready to go. They've teamed up with Asset Development, who's the contractor who's going to start work. They've actually been out, laid the site out. They want to get going with a favorable nod here for the extension and start clearing this winter while the ground's still frozen, and really are ready to go in earnest. So it's the long and short of the request and how we got here.
Anyone have any questions?
Just a small one. I think I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. Property's still in the control of the prior owner who was permitted or received the approval for this project?
That is correct.
And so the financial performance is also going to be associated with that entity?
Yes.
Linda?
Yeah, because there's so many, there were bunches of names and things. May I ask, what is your name again, and what is your relationship to this whole process, and who are the other people? I don't know whether they're here or not, but could you just give us a little rundown of who's who?
Yeah, sure. Tom Perkins with Dirigo Architectural Engineering. I'm the design firm that they retained to represent them as the applicant on this, and then
Originally, or, I know you were
Originally
here before.
Originally as well, yes. Yep. And then the two principals for the Beta Zeta properties are here, Chris Webster and Johan Noren.
So the people that are going to be owning this and developing are,
They still own it.
people? Oh.
They've teamed up with Asset Development, which is a development firm that does this sort of stuff all the time to actually get the work going effectively like a contractor.
okay, and sorry to sound
No, no.
redundant.
Great questions.
But the engineering people that did the original work is your company?
Yes.
And are you going to be, I don't know whether this is proprietary or not, but are you going to be working with the people now that are doing the work?
Yes, we are.
And because you obviously know all the, everything that happened with all of this over all these many years, which in my review was all the way back to 2021. So there's been a lot of on and offs all of this time. So everything that has to be done from the review of all these, everything that was brought up that has to be approved is still on the books because there's no changes. Has anything been done since you got your approval 2 years ago?
We've just gone out with surveyors and started layout. There's been no physical work done on the site.
And none of the, in all of the list of what was, things that had to have been done based on our review and what was on there, nothing has been done towards any of that?
We're going to move, now that everything's green lighted, all of the conditions of approval, we'll be working through that with staff. Pre-construction meeting, performance guarantees, all of those things. And then, the big thing to bring back great memory, I'm sure, for those that were here is the drinking water and the wells and coordinating that with the state agency that oversees that. That is all part of the program. That hasn't changed.
Okay.
Yeah, so all those conditions from the original approval, this would literally be just extending that original approval as it was. All the conditions stay in place. So, before the building permits are pulled, I think the NOD from back then even talked about before clearing was done, that at least some of those conditions apply before that. Some other ones apply before a certificate of occupancy is given. It depends. It goes condition by condition. But, yeah, all of that would still be in effect with this.
Kyle?
Yep, go ahead, Lynn.
Assuming that you start taking down trees this winter, what is your projected timeline for seeing this thing complete and ready for occupancy? Do you have a clue?
First phase of work is 12 to 16, 18 months, which is the same phasing plan that we showed on the original submission.
Yeah, so just for context for the board, not everyone was here back then. The original approval, I just had it up, the subdivision plat, it was approved in 2 phases. The first phase, I think, was the larger of the two. Maybe, was it like 2/3 of the project maybe was in the first
About half,
phase?
yeah.
So that's how the project was originally laid out.
Any other questions? I have two.
Yeah, go ahead.
One, just a point of clarification. Kyle mentioned that there have been some questions about what the performance guarantee should look like, bond, letter of credit. And I'm looking at your original approval. It just says a performance guarantee in accordance with Article 12.9 of our zoning ordinance. So just to be clear, in my view, that can go in any way the town and the town attorney say is, okay, you don't need to come back from us if you deviate from a bond to a letter of credit. And the other is something that I think we're going to explore putting into all conditions of approval on all subdivisions from now on, and that is re-examining the technical and financial capacity of an applicant if a project gets approved and it gets sold or management control changes. It should be in our ordinance anyway. So I'm going to have a motion, propose something, if it's okay with the staff, that the order of the original approval be amended as follows. And I found it. With the following additional condition. As required by the provisions of Town of Freeport subdivision ordinance, the Project Review Board has made the necessary findings relative to this applicant's technical and financial capacity to complete the project as approved. Any change of ownership or management control of this project prior to completion of construction of all project infrastructure shall require review and approval by the Project Review Board relative to technical and financial capacity related to the new owner or party with management control. It's only those two issues that we'd have to bless. Any discussion about that, or is there a second?
Makes sense. Second?
Any discussion? All in favor? That's okay.
Well, now, were you just approving the condition of approval or the whole motion to extend?
I'm sorry,
the
and
subdivision?
and also the proposed order for the extension.
Oh, I'm not ready to do that.
You're not ready? Okay.
So my question being the fact that this has been going on for so many years, I understand things happen, good, bad, awful, whatever, but I'm not sure why we need to approve for 2 more years, because I think, I just feel like to give an approval to start, because when it says is the start of construction for 2 years, within 2 years. It's not finished construction, which is certainly reasonable. So I don't know why we wouldn't start with an approval for a 1-year term. Make sure things get going on this is what I think, because this has been going on for years. Who knows how many things will change in our ordinances. We're not allowed, according to what we will say, that we can't add new things to an approval once it's there. We can't add it to the continuance. So I hate to say, give it 2 more years and then this contract falls apart or something else happens. And it just doesn't make sense to me to do 2 years. I would rather do an approval extension for 1 year, make sure things get going, and then it's your turn to take as much time as you need once you get started. There's no end point in having things done, as far as I understand.
So just to add context to what you were just talking about, when we say start of construction, initiate construction is a defined term in our subdivision ordinance. It doesn't mean just, you put 1 square foot of impervious down to start the road, or, you put a shovel in the ground. It means you've completed like 30% of the total cost of improvements. So
Regulations, is
yeah, so our subdivision ordinance, initiate construction is defined as the completion of a portion of the improvements, which represents no less than 30% of the cost of the proposed improvements within an approved subdivision. So when you're talking a subdivision of this scale, 30% is a decent chunk of work. Not that it couldn't be done necessarily in a year, or not that another extension request couldn't be made, but just to add context to that.
I take all what I said back, because I did not
Yeah.
go into definitions. I just read the regulations.
Yeah, when you hear start of construction, it sounds like just, shovels in the ground, it's good to go, but it's a little more substantial than that, yeah.
Well, yeah, I also thought it was 2 years from date of approval, which is what I thought it says. Date of approval does not mean any of the construction has happened on that day. So, I take back what I.
Okay, so we'd run
my
two.
understanding.
So any extension we give tonight would be for another 2 years. Any other discussion before I amend my motion? We'll have to go through it for a second again, but the motion, as I read it into the record, added with the following as proposed in the staff report. Be it ordered that Freeport Project Review Board grant an extension of the previously approved subdivision approval for the proposed Harrisika Ridge subdivision on US Route 1, tax map 18, lot 16. To be built substantially as proposed, finding that no municipal ordinances affecting the approvals have changed, and therefore the application would still meet the standards of the Freeport subdivision ordinance with the following conditions of approval. 1, the findings of fact and all conditions of approval related to the board's 3/2024 approval are still applicable. And 2, my new one, as required by the provisions of the Town of Freeport subdivision ordinance, the Freeport Project Review Board has made the necessary findings relative to this applicant's technical and financial capacity to complete this project as approved. Any change in ownership or management control of this project prior to the completion of construction of all project infrastructure shall require review and approval by the Project Review Board relative to technical and financial capacity related to the new owner or party in management control. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Is there any discussion? All in favor? Lynn?
Aye.
It's unanimous.
Thank you.
That completes our agenda.
The presentation?
By you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I
That
thought you meant the
completes
whole
the business we were going to conduct, and Kyle's going to give us some schooling on a specific aspect of our own ordinance, and people are welcome to stay if they want.
All right.
27 minutes.
I know.
Didn't get your record.
Could have saved a few.
Thank you for coming, folks. Glad you're expanding.
Thank you, yeah, good stuff.
Thanks. Lynn, can you see the presentation I have up?
I'm looking at the board. All I see is the board. 1 second. Yes, now I can.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so the last time we did one of these, it was more of a high-level look at all of the things the board looks at, all the different ordinances. So for the first one, diving into more specific territory, wanted to look at the zoning ordinance and site plan review, since I think those are probably the things we use most frequently. So that was a good place to start. So generally, the zoning ordinance, right, it's chapter 21. So, every time I mention chapter 21 in the staff report, this is what we're talking about. The overall purpose of a zoning ordinance is, you're looking at land use and you're regulating those land uses to promote health, safety, and general welfare. And in some way, all the standards, all the permitted uses, all the dimensional requirements are somehow supposed to point back to that. The zoning ordinance has, a few key articles that we use most frequently. And these are the things that I'll reference in the staff report when we're talking about certain standards or uses or, whatever. So yeah, definitions, zoning district, kind of specific regulations for individual zoning districts, performance standards, and then the administrative section, which is where our site plan review section is housed, along with the language for code enforcement and building permits. So we're going to walk through kind of each one of these topics and just, talk about primarily what you'll find there and what it's, most useful for. So definitions, right, it's pretty self-explanatory. This is, where you get terms. And I think, we just had a good example of sometimes the definitions shed light on things that are not always super obvious when you just look at a term. Definitions sometimes have standards built into them, which is not a great practice, but it's just a fact that sometimes they do. So when you're looking at things like interpreting land uses, it's always good to, so we have a project for construction services. Well, what does construction services actually entail? When people come in and they say, hey, I have this idea of something I want to do in this zoning district. Often it's a conversation with myself and someone from codes about like, okay, well, where exactly does that activity fall? Like what land use does it fall under? And we go to the definitions to find out. So like, for example, business and professional offices, so obviously, an office building, your typical office building would fall under this. But, you might not think right away that something like a barber shop or a beauty salon would fall under an office. Like in other communities, this might fall under service business use, but we don't have service business as a land use in Freeport. So going to the definitions to look at what uses are specifically defined as is a great thing to do at an earlier stage. So aside from uses, another good thing to come to the definitions for is when you're thinking about space and bulk standards. So this is all of your minimum lot size, your land area per dwelling, building height, setbacks, net residential acreage, all of those square footage numbers and, percentages and things like that we talk about in the staff report, coming to the definitions to see exactly how those are calculated or, what they entail. For instance, building height, every community calculates building height slightly differently. So it's not always as simple as just, measuring for the proposed building from the elevation to the top of the roof. Our ordinance has a very weird, complex definition of building height. So again, super useful to come back here and see, the kind of specifics here. Setbacks, like a definition for a setback might include a exemption that some sort of structure doesn't have to meet a setback. So that's the sort of stuff that can be useful to find there. And then finally, it can provide context for some performance standards. So something like outdoor storage. You might see in a performance standard section or in one of the zoning districts, it talks about something to the effect of like, oh, all outdoor storage should be screened and buffered, through a variety of landscaping or fencing or something. Okay, well, what does outdoor storage actually mean? So you can go to the definitions and see that there's a time limit that has to be met. It's things that aren't for sale, so it might not apply to a retail store that was approved for some sort of outdoor sales. So it's important because then in an application, if someone does bring up, we might have some things stored outside for a few hours here and there. Well, that doesn't meet the definition, so they wouldn't have to screen it. So definitions is great for all of these little kind of nuances with, other standards and terms we'll see throughout the ordinance.
Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
Sorry, a quick question. If we approve an application, and especially if we discuss something that's not clear cut, does that now become the standard for any other application that's subsequently submitted?
So if something's not addressed
Clear.
well,
Yep.
yeah. Generally try to just have a best practice. Typically if something isn't addressed, like if it's a standard that's not addressed, you would typically view that as something that's not required. Then there's nothing to meet if there's no standard telling you what to do. If a land use itself isn't met, like someone comes in and says, I want to do, X activity in this building, and we don't have a use listed that covers it, there's really two options. One, you can approve it as like the closest next thing, try to fit it into something else. Or two would be to say, well, there's nothing even close to it, and, so it's just not allowed. But yeah, it's generally good. Like, let's say there's a performance standard that's kind of up for interpretation. If the board has interpreted it one way, you should carry forward that same interpretation every time. And that's kind of something we would just bring up, I think. I mean, ultimately, if something like that came up, we'd want to clarify it in the ordinance, and, you know, we typically would do that. We'd add it to a list and say, all right, at some point when we have free time, you know, this issue came up at the board, something was unclear, like, let's fix it and cement it in the ordinance. But yeah, we should be consistent where possible. All right, so after definitions, you know, as you scroll through the zoning ordinance, then you hit the zoning district regulations. And so this section, or this article, has a unique section for every single zoning district in the town. So your village districts, your rural districts, C1, C3, all of those will have their own section. And this is a great place. This is really the first place that you'd want to go. Like when people come in, potential developers with ideas, this is the first place staff will go. You know, we'll ask, all right, where's the lot that you're looking to do something? Okay, it's in X zone. Let's go to that zoning district in the ordinance, and that'll give us a high-level idea if the general activity is allowed and if you're going to have the room on the site to do what you're looking to do. So each one of these zoning district sections is going to have a purpose, which isn't really a regulatory tool. There's no standard there, but it just kind of gives you a general idea of the types of things you might find in the district. It's going to have a list of permitted uses. So that's what the top image is. You know, you have your permitted uses, which are usually things like single-family homes, duplexes, like agriculture in the rural areas, things that just need a building permit through codes. And then you have all your other uses that require site plan review, which are, you know, typically commercial, multifamily, or industrial uses. And then, so that kind of ties into what I was just talking about, the definitions. You know, once we've established, oh, okay, you're a business and professional office, you know, if we needed to go to that definition, we could. Ideally, all of these uses have their own definitions. I don't think that's actually the case, but in a perfect world, we would have every single land use defined clearly in the ordinance. So that's something we'll probably pick away at over time. After the permitted uses, you get your space and bulk standards. So that's where you get your dimensional requirements. You know, you see, you know, what minimum lot size you need in the district, what frontage requirements, setbacks, building height, impervious area. That's where all of that stuff is housed. If we're looking at a subdivision, that's where you'll have the space standards for like net residential density and things like that. And then below the space standards in each district, you have a kind of general standards section. So this is similar to performance standards, but it's specific to whatever zoning district you're looking at. So like you might have landscaping standards there or parking standards. It's something that probably could go into another section, a more general section in the ordinance somewhere else. But because it's so specific to a single zoning district, it's put in there instead. Hey, Sophie.
Hi, Sophie. You know what we're doing?
I do.
So this is
And yet she's still here by choice.
So I just made myself a note to send, so you do know where Kyle's schooling us on all aspects of what we do. I just made myself a note to tell Sam Capella, because I think when we roll new members onto either the planning board or project review board, this package is going to be great.
I think you're right. I'm going to leave you to it now. I was just calling to make sure you weren't causing a huge stir here, but.
Sorry to disappoint you.
The principal's leaving the building.
No stir, we just told everybody we weren't approving anything tonight, and they kicked him out of the room, so it was easy.
Yeah.
Nope.
So yeah, this is a great first stop. So, you know, when we, you know, get the conceptual applications, you this is, if the board wants to dive in beyond staff report, this is a good place to come. You see, oh, this person's proposing a project in the MDB district, in that staff report for the construction services building we had earlier, we would have mentioned some cross-references to the MDB district and the building design standards. And so that's where this came from. It's in the other standards section of the MDB zoning district. So then after that, you kind of get more granular and more specific. So once you've established the use and the kind of dimensional aspects of the site, okay, this activity is generally allowed. The size of the building can generally fit, through a kind of conceptual layout. Now, we get into the more technical, specific aspects of the zoning ordinance, and that's in the performance standards. So some of our performance standard sections are for specific land uses. So some of our, especially like more recently, I think this has happened a lot. Things like accessory dwelling units, affordable housing developments, solar, cannabis, like those are all their own land uses, but they all have their own dedicated performance standards sections. A lot of times when things come down from the state, there will be a model ordinance attached, and that kind of gets just transferred into its own performance standard section. And it, is a whole host of rules that regulates that specific activity. Yeah.
You actually just treaded on a question I wanted to ask. Because there are a lot of things that there are state rules that govern the things that are in our ordinance. Should we be assuming that either those are already made part of our ordinance, or that you as staff would highlight those things for us to consider for when a project comes?
Yeah. There could be a few ways that this comes up. So there could be a state law that's simply requires municipalities to add something to their ordinance, in which case we would add the specifics to our ordinance. So think like the housing stuff around LD 2003, and now the updates to that in LD 1829 and all that stuff. State law says municipalities have to comply with that, so we make those specific changes to our ordinance. So if a project came up taking advantage of those, we wouldn't really reference the state law, we would just reference our ordinance, which already does what the state law says. But things like cannabis, right? Like there's a separate licensing process through the state. Now, a lot of those standards end up getting duplicated in municipal ordinances, but municipalities don't have to allow everything that the state made rules for. A municipality could not allow any establishments. They could require something stricter than the state. It depends. It's not necessarily a one-for-one. So again, we would have our own rules, and then the state licensing, when someone was actually trying to do one of those activities would be, a separate process. But on their side, there would be a lot of overlap in the information they had to show. Same with things like the solar. But yeah, with stormwater, it'll come up a lot. Like our stormwater standards generally will follow what DEP requires, or a project will need DEP approval potentially anyway, separate from what we find. So we'll comment on that sort of thing, that either condition it that they still need to go out and get their state review or state permitting, or that they've already done so. So yeah. So then the other piece, aside from the specific land use sections, there's the more general sections. So you have your kind of performance standards for things like stormwater and off-street parking requirements and landscape buffers, exterior lighting, all of your nuisances, noise, things like that will fall under there. And like things like access management, widths of driveways, and, if we wanted to require things like electric vehicle parking, things like that would all go into the performance standards for whatever individual topic we would be looking at. And you'll see later on when we get to site plan that these performance standard sections tie in very closely with the findings of fact and the review criteria that the board makes when they're looking at site plan projects. So there's a lot of connection there. So brings us to site plan review. So site plan review is section 602 of the zoning ordinance. So that's, again, you'll see a lot of times we'll cross-reference, you'll see section 602.B.2. A in the staff report. Anything with 602 is specifically talking about our site plan review section of the zoning ordinance. So all of those permitted uses that are identified in the zoning district sections earlier on, that's what will trigger site plan review. So that's where we find out if something needs to go through the site plan review process. Again, this generally applies to commercial, industrial, multifamily uses, your bigger, more substantial activities, not things like single-family homes and duplexes and other things like that. So within the site plan review section, there's a few important subsections to keep in mind. One, it outlines the process. So from the time an applicant comes in with an idea to the time they get approved through the board, you'll see exactly what needs to be done. And then two, submission requirements. It outlines everything that the applicant needs to provide for a complete application to be made. So like what we talked about earlier with the conceptual applications, that's a little more vague. There isn't a specific checklist. So, you'll see sometimes we get really pared back, just more kind of conceptual graphics and ideas. And sometimes people are already working with engineering firms, so they already are a lot further along. But we don't really have a specific requirement for that. But when we get to the full application, you need to meet all of those submission requirements outlined here. And when applications don't, they submit their applications a few weeks before the meeting, staff looks at it, that's what we're reviewing. Noting, they didn't include a landscaping plan, they didn't include a photometric plan for lighting, sending those comments back to the applicant, and then they have the opportunity to address those things before the board meets and hopefully get them in so we can keep them on the same timeline. But sometimes it pushes application back a month or something like that, depending on how many materials they're missing. And then finally, it has the review criteria and standards, and that's what the board uses to base the findings of fact off of. So diving into the process a little more, just because this is all stuff that happens leading up to applications coming to the PRB. So I think it's important for the board to kind of be aware of like how much is happening before things ever even get here. So the first step, the first official step, a lot of times more casual conversations are happening even before step one here. But the first official step is that there's a pre-app meeting between the applicant and staff. And depending on the size of the project, usually it's myself and someone from codes that meets with the applicant. For larger projects, we might invite fire, police, public works to attend as well, just so they can give high-level comments early on. And this is really just like a a really high-level conversation, more so outlining the process for the applicants, they might have a conceptual kind of sketch plan at this stage if it's a bigger project. And we can look at some things, say like, oh, the way you've laid something out is just not going to work. There's like a specific requirement in the ordinance that you're just not going to be able to meet, so you're going to have to kind of shift things around here. Or give it a general, like, yeah, I mean, it looks pretty good. It seems like you're ready to make your conceptual application to the board. Here's some things to look out for. So after that pre-app meeting, the applicant works on putting their conceptual application together. They submit that 21 days prior to a project review board meeting. We do that preliminary review. We give the applicant some feedback, not too much usually at this stage. Usually at the conceptual phase, we're not reaching out to our peer review engineer yet for substantial comments because there's just nothing to comment on. Sometimes with the recent housing projects on Depot Street, there was enough at the conceptual phase where we could do some early review. That way it's not coming as such a shock later on. But like with tonight's application, right, there's just not a whole lot to go on yet. So then, it comes to PRB, we do the conceptual application, you just hear from any neighbors, you decide if you want to do a site walk, things like that. Then the applicant goes back and starts working on their final application. This can be done the next month if they're already, working on a lot of this stuff, or it can take a few months. I think, talking about practices, I think generally what we've done is if things disappear for more than 6 months before they come back with their final, then we should probably look at doing another conceptual because it's been a while and things could have changed or people have forgotten, new board members, all of that. So that's generally what staff is telling applicants is if you're going to do a concept, try to be ready to come within 6 months for the actual full submission. So then they put together their final application, they resubmit, we do our complete review at this point, and we go through that same process again. There's typically more back and forth at this point because we have all the engineering comments. So it's usually a rush in that last week to get materials back and forth so we can get it out with the staff report, an updated stormwater management plan or whatever it is.
Just an observation or a question then. So you get 21 days prior, but you've got to give us final materials 14 days prior?
Well, so we send out there's no requirement that we have to send out the packets the Thursday before, but I mean, as a practice, I wouldn't want to cut that any shorter.
So you've got 2 weeks to basically do all your work.
It's pretty short. It's weird. The ordinance actually says 30 days for PRB applications, but the PRB rules say 21 days. So it's something I've highlighted before, and I talked with the planning board and Ford about previously about maybe wanting to look at that, being more consistent there, maybe giving a little more time for review up front so things don't have to come back so much afterwards and there's not so much of a rush like right before the meeting with getting in materials because it can be a little stressful trying to get everything to work out. But yeah, as of now, that's like what our practice is. So, yeah, and then so PRB has their meeting, and that's where we have the possible decision. Obviously, we can go on from there if things aren't ready. It can be extended out to additional meetings, but that's the general process for the typical larger site plan applications that are coming to the project review board. So submission requirements, like I said, they're all outlined in 602. I think this is something we could also probably add some more detail to over time. But for now, this basically is saying what you need to show on your plans and the narrative, your stormwater, utilities, landscaping, lighting, all of that stuff. It's outlined here. One important thing that I wanted to call out is that, in general, the board can't really waive performance standards or zoning district specific, like space and bulk standards, unless there's a specific waiver provision called out in the ordinance. So, like if there's a setback standard for 10 feet, the project review board can't just approve a 5-foot setback unless it specifically says, the setback here is 10 feet unless, so-and-so is met, and then the PRB can approve a 5-foot setback. However, the PRB can approve waivers of submission requirements. So, a lot of times site plan projects don't, just aren't at a scale that they need to meet all of the submission requirements. So someone might propose exterior lighting. So you're not going to make them do a photometric plan if they don't have to, if they're not doing exterior lighting because there's nothing to show on the plan. So those sorts of things can be waived by the board. Question?
This is a silly question from a tactical perspective, not a strategic one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we waive submission requirements because you tell them what they need to submit, then they come to us with the package. It's almost too late at that point. If we, because unless we want to have a risk of us having to tell somebody that they didn't meet the requirements of the ordinance when they show up at the meeting.
Yeah, typically it's like we do it through the findings where it'll say not applicable because, there is no this thing that's being asked for.
I guess in practice, in practice, it sounds like what that means is you are waiving those things, and you're just letting us know that you don't think those are required.
Yeah.
And again, I guess that there's at least a risk, albeit extraordinarily small, that we might say, I disagree with you.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But that's something so to make it clear to the board, when I talk to applicants in advance of coming to the PRB, we make it very clear that planning staff is not making any decisions, that ultimately I can give guidance and recommendations, but the board is the one who makes the final decision. So I might say something like, I think it'll go this way, or there's a high likelihood that it might go this way, but ultimately it's up to the board. I'll speak more clearly on things that are established in the ordinance. But let's say someone was asking about, landscaping and buffering is one that gets really kind of vague, because a lot of times the ordinance gives the board a lot of discretion around what type of landscaping is provided in a buffer requirement. So, I can say to an applicant, looks like there's a bit of a sensitivity on the abutting lot. I could see the board wanting to see some buffering here to provide a screen. But, I can't speak to if, 2 trees here is going to be good enough, or if they're going to want to see more. You're going to have to go and get that. So, yeah, I usually try to qualify everything I say with it's subject to change based on board feedback, but just give people a decent idea, and then give the board a decent idea of where staff is coming from in the staff report. But there could be a specific waiver for something that isn't necessarily a recommendation from staff. Someone could, I'm trying to think of an example. Someone could say, I don't think we have to, provide any stormwater management plan, and they ask for a waiver of that. Now, I don't think it would meet the standards, so I wouldn't agree with it, and I would write in the staff report that, staff feels they do have to require stormwater management. but they've requested a waiver from the submission requirement. Something like that, I guess, could happen, although it's pretty unlikely. But yeah, typically we address these through just like a general finding of not applicable. But yeah, the board could always ask for something still. That's why we always, when you get those findings, they're always proposed, and there's always that little blurb that the board can always add to those. Staff's really just providing a basis to go off of, so we don't have to sit here and go one by one for every single project. I think the waivers come up a little more in subdivision than they do in site plan as well, because there's things like traffic, more advanced traffic studies or street requirements. Like when people build streets, there might be a waiver to request not building a sidewalk because there's no sidewalk for 5 miles around the project or something. So things like that will come up more on the subdivision side too. All right, and then I think next to last here, we have the review criteria. So these are, speaking of findings, these are the topics of the findings of fact. So there's 14 review criteria that we currently have in site plan review. So these are your preservation of landscape, vehicular access, surface water drainage, exterior lighting, financial technical capacity, those sorts of things that the board's actually making a decision on. So these are the basis for the findings. But what they do, like what I was talking about earlier, is these criteria are tied directly to the performance and zoning district standards that we discussed previously. So when we're writing the findings, and in the staff report, what we're trying to do is attach these more general review criteria to specific performance standards or standards, zoning district standards elsewhere in the zoning ordinance. So, for example, the review criteria for parking and circulation talks about, layout and design of walkways and parking areas being safe and convenient with general separation. So there's a little bit of a standard there, but it's not specific. There's not like a number. It's not saying, oh, the separation has to be done through certain materials or, specifics. Those specifics might come from the off-street parking section performance standards. So when we're writing the finding for parking and circulation, we'll tie it to section 514, off-street parking, and we'll say the project has provided adequate parking spaces as required under 514. The parking spaces are all the proper dimensions. They've shown adequate separation of pedestrian access and vehicular access, through a crosswalk and a sidewalk. The travel aisle is the proper width and meets the minimum requirement. So that's usually what we're trying to do, is we're trying to tie the specific requirements outlined in the zoning districts and performance standards to the more general findings. So like things like when we're talking about landscaping, there might be a general landscaping finding, but then elsewhere in the performance standards or the zoning district, it might say, no, you have to plant X number of trees along the road frontage, or there needs to be a 15-foot landscape setback in front of the building, between the building and the roadway, or something like that. So the connection between those two is really important, because sometimes if you just look at the review criteria, it can be fairly vague and hard to know what specifically you should be asking the applicant of, where if you can tie the finding to the performance standards and zoning district, it becomes a lot easier to give specifics and, ask a project to meet certain quantifiable standards. And then post-approval. So again, on the other side, after the board approves it, you don't always get to see this part as well. So pretty much every time the PRB approves a project, it's with conditions of approval. I mean, some are just standard and some are specific and unique to individual projects. After a project is approved, we send the applicant a notice of decision with their findings and all of the conditions of approval. And this is when staff starts working with the applicant to satisfy all those conditions. So we send them, you know, for the performance guarantee, we'll send them a sample letter of credit that they can take to the bank and have filled out. We'll send them a template for a stormwater maintenance agreement so they can just fill in the blanks and come in and have it signed and notarized, and then they take it to get recorded. You know, we arrange a pre-construction meeting with our peer review engineer who does the site inspections throughout construction, and the contractor and development team. And that's usually the turning point, the pre-construction meeting, from when it goes from planning's hands over to code enforcement and they get their building permits. So after all those conditions are met, they get their building permits, and then during construction, planning's role at that point is really that we keep in contact with our peer review engineer who's doing regular site inspections. And that's key because that's letting us know that the project is actually being built as it was approved by the PRB. So they're looking at, you know, are erosion control measures being put down properly throughout construction? Is the stormwater management being built properly? You know, they don't review the building itself. It's more of the site work and utilities and all of that stuff. But it's to verify that at the end of construction, we're not looking at a development that's wildly different than what the board approved. And if there are changes along the way, it allows us to stay in contact, and, you know, minor amendments happen. You get on site and, you know, you realize that, oh, we actually need to do something a little differently. That's when they might submit to staff a site plan amendment that, you know, I could potentially staff approve if it's small enough, or it might have to come back to the board for review if it's big enough, to address any kind of in the field concerns or changes. And then, so once the project's complete, we do a final inspection to make sure everything is done as it was approved. And that's when we release the performance guarantee back to the applicant, and the project's considered complete at that point. That's pretty much it.
Well done, Kyle.
Yeah, very helpful.
Thanks, Kyle.
That's really good.
Any questions for Kyle?
Who determines if some of the money in the performance guarantee is needed to, you know, be kept because they had to do extra work, or, you know, or you had to do extra work? Who makes that decision?
Yeah, so with the performance guarantee, it's based on those site inspections. So the site inspections will report if anything's being done incorrectly. And then, so the developer will have a chance to correct whatever they, you know, didn't do adequately. If it came down to a point where they were refusing to correct something, or midway through a project, they just got up and left, that's when we would use the performance guarantee money. We would draw on that to stabilize the site in whatever way was needed. But typically, through bigger projects, developers might ask to release some of the PG money in phases. So when they complete the earthwork, or they complete, you know, some aspect of the site work, they might ask our peer review engineer to go out and do an inspection just on that piece. They'll verify in an email and a report to me that, okay, that aspect of the project is done and complete, and it looks good. And that's when I'll work with finance to have them release the amount just for that piece. And we'll hold on to the rest of it while the other work is being done. But that way, you know, they can get their letter of credit and escrows down a little bit at least.
So in the site plan review standards, presumably if there's a similar standard in section 5, those two are complementary to one another. Do we have the interpretive ability, I guess, to use section 5 standards within site plan if they're not specifically listed in site plan as they, obviously relate to a project application?
Yeah, basically all land uses will have to meet the performance standards. So
Okay.
as long as they're relevant
Yeah,
to
exactly,
a
right,
project, right? Like an office building isn't going to have to meet a performance standard for an accessory dwelling unit because it's just not an accessory dwelling unit. But generally, every project going through site plan has to meet all of those performance standards, and they should all tie into the 602 review criteria in some fashion or another. They should all be able to connect. But even if they didn't, I think there's probably a general standard somewhere in the zoning ordinance that says you have to meet all of the standards of the ordinance. So there'll be things on the building permit side where they don't have to meet all of the performance standards. Like, a lot of our performance standard sections will start out saying, like, this is for projects that require site plan review, or this standard is for projects that require review by the project review board. So like a single family home doesn't have to go out and do a stormwater management plan when they get built. But for all of the site plan projects, they would have to meet those standards.
Sure, okay, all right. And one last question. Is there language somewhere within the overall ordinance that helps guide us when it comes to whether or not it'd be beneficial to have the town attorney attend meetings? Or if not, then what is the process if we feel like we want that or need that, or like?
So there's general language in 602 that talks about the PRB has the ability to request experts get involved. I forget what the exact language is, but you can require the applicant to do a study. I think you could ask staff to, get someone to do something. But that would be, the mechanism would be either staff identifies early on that there's some contentious issue, and we recommend the town attorney just being present at a meeting. Or if staff hasn't done it and something gets to the PRB, I think that the PRB could make that request. But there's no formal threshold that says, oh, if this happens, the town attorney has to be present.
If we're making that request, are we voting on it to decide if everybody feels the same way, or is it?
I think if it's something that got where staff hasn't already done it and it's before the PRB, then yeah, I think that could make sense.
Okay.
We would have to, I'm assuming, we would have to, if we're going to make such a request, we're going to have to be able to tie that in some way, shape, or form back to, what we're talking about tonight. It's something related to the site plan review or the performance standards or.
Yeah. Yeah, and you'd want to look at, is this something that, you're requiring the applicant to pay for? You're putting the burden on them because there's some aspect of their project that you feel needs legal review. And so just like the applicant pays, puts money into an escrow to pay for our engineering review, they would do so for legal review. That happens, all the time. Typically, especially with subdivisions, if there's condominium declarations or something, right? We have done legal review. So there are times when we would just bring the town attorney in anyway, but with a typical site plan application, it wouldn't necessarily be something that was required. But yeah, there could be instances where it came up and we'd want it, and I think it would just be a decision that the board would have to make at the time.
Okay.
Good review, Kyle. And Drew, thanks for having the idea. Can we do this? Sharon, next time, remind us, and we'll adjourn the meeting before we do this, so you can go home.
I was thinking,
Speaking of adjourning, have we got a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
From a distance.
Bye, Lynn.
thinking that very.
Bye.
Good night. Good luck with your closing tomorrow, man. Kyle becomes a homeowner tomorrow.
Oh, nice.
Where?
In South Portland.
Good for you. Yeah. Congratulations.